You remember a face that never turned toward you. You remember it vividly, though you never saw it clearly, not once. It lingers in doorways, behind veils, on the edge of a candle's reach. She looked at you without looking, and you mistook that absence for love. Her silence made you want to speak more. Her mystery made you beg for meaning, but nothing was given, nothing was explained. And yet, you stayed. You stayed because the not knowing wrapped itself around your ribs like something holy. You thought desire was in the body, but no, it was in the dissonance. It was in how she withheld the last sentence, in how she smiled without joy, in how she asked nothing, yet owned everything. There is a woman in your past you never touched, but she ruined you all the same. A woman who did not want your understanding, only your disorientation, and something inside you, the part that still watches closed doors, wants her back. Not to possess her, but to lose yourself again. This time, with your eyes open. You see her before you, but she does not see you. Or perhaps she does, but not in the way you crave. Her eyes rest on your outline like candlelight on stone, gentle, indifferent, flickering with a warmth that never reaches heat. She exists as if she were born just to be watched, not to be understood, not to be touched, but only observed from afar, with reverence and confusion. And you, the trembling witness, mistake this distance for permission. You step closer, you offer language, you offer explanations, and in doing so, you kill the very thing you sought to hold. For the moment a woman is understood, she is no longer desired. The veil slips, the spell breaks, she becomes knowable, and in that knowing, collapses into the ordinary. You pretend to want truth, but your bones ache for mystery. You want the parts she will not say aloud, the contradictions she hides behind perfectly timed silences, the unspeakable things that are never really unspeakable, just too sacred to reduce to words. When you press her for clarity, it is not love, it is fear. The fear of being left outside her door, watching shadows move behind the curtain while your need grows teeth. You ask her what she feels, but you do not want her feelings. You want the tremor before they form. You want the tremble in her voice when she says she's fine, and you know she is not. That is the moment you fall to your knees, not from love, but from the sickness of wanting what can't be named. You say you want connection, but it is the ache of disconnection that stirs you. It is the space between your question and her delay. That space becomes holy. It becomes the altar upon which you sacrifice your certainty, and that you call devotion. She lets you look because she knows you cannot see. She lets you speak because your voice fills the silence she controls. She does not want to be deciphered. She wants to be worshipped in confusion. That is her domain, not your understanding, but your helplessness. She was never the woman in your arms. She was the one who disappeared when you thought you had her. The one whose absence you mistake for fate. The one you never kissed, yet still taste in your every regret. You believe you desire her, but that is not the truth. What you desire is your own incompleteness, your need to dissolve into something larger than sense. She becomes the symbol of that dissolution, a mirror that refuses to reflect, a flame that burns in reverse. You do not love her, you love the feeling of being ruined by her. You love the unsolvable ache, the hunger with no mouth, the prayer whispered in a language you can't remember ever learning. And when you try to make her speak plainly, she recoils. She senses your desperation. She knows that men who chase understanding are men who cannot endure the sacred chaos of longing. She sees that in your eyes, that thirst to reduce her to a conclusion. But she is not a conclusion. She is the trembling before it. And so, she denies you not out of cruelty, but to preserve the only form of intimacy you are capable of surviving, the one that wounds you without touching you. You think you are chasing her, but truly, you are chasing yourself through her absence. Her silence mirrors your own, the parts of you that were never named, never held, never confessed. You long for her because she echoes the hole you carry, a hole too deep for understanding, too wide for closure. She becomes the fiction you offer that hole, hoping it will make sense of your ache. But fiction has no duty to heal, only to haunt. You remember the time she looked at you without blinking, and you swore she knew you. But what she saw was not you, it was your hunger dressed up in reverence. She did not fall for your words. She listened to your silence, to the cracks between your sentences, and she found them lacking. Not in intelligence, not in charm, but in depth. You wanted her, yes, but you wanted her like a man wants fire in the cold to warm you, not to destroy you. She wanted to be the kind of fire that ruins you entirely. She never wanted you to understand her pain. She wanted you to feel the edge of it, to see it move behind her smile, to know it was there without dissecting it. She is not the wounded bird begging for your kindness. She is the siren who tests your ability to drown. You want to rescue her, and in doing so, you strip her of power. But she never needed saving. She needed to see if you could stand in her storm without asking for a map. You wanted love, but she was offering tragedy. You wanted a story that made sense, but she lived in symbols, in scent, in half-finished gestures. She was the kind of woman who left your bed before dawn and left no trace except the rearrangement of your soul. You mistook this for cruelty, but it was mercy. Mercy, because she did not let you stay in the illusion. Mercy, because she let you suffer the truth without softening it. You did not lose her. You were never meant to have her. She is the gaze that cannot be returned, because to look back would mean to name the thing, and to name it is to kill it. She withholds herself not out of arrogance, but out of reverence for what desire becomes when it is not consumed. She knows that once you know her fully, you will stop trembling, and she would rather haunt you than be held by you. She would rather be a wound that keeps you alive than a possession that makes you numb. So you stand there still, don't you? Years later, conversations forgotten, bodies aged, and yet, some nights, her silence is louder than all the women who spoke your language. You light another cigarette, or open another page, or touch another body and find yourself asking not where she is, but where you left the part of yourself that once knelt in confusion before her. Because she is not a woman. She is the unanswered question you built your manhood around, the unknowable wound you named passion. She never wanted to be loved. She wanted to be remembered. And you, poor soul, remember her best when you are furthest from meaning. You wanted her to look at you as if you were the answer, but she looked at you as if you were the mirror. And when you turned away, unable to endure your reflection, she vanished. Not out of spite, but because she was never real, only the part of you that longed to remain unspoken. You cannot return to her because you never truly met her. You met your need dressed in the shape of her mouth. You met your despair painted in the tilt of her smile. She was never flesh, she was symbol, she was hunger, and she will remain. As long as you do not name her, as long as you keep watching for a gaze that never returns, a gaze that was never meant to. You thought knowing her would bring you closer, that understanding her fears, mapping her patterns, deciphering her silences would make her love you more deeply. But what grew instead was a quiet coldness between you, not born from cruelty, but from exposure. Like the way moonlight makes beauty pale, You tried to love her by naming her, and in naming her, you made her smaller. What once moved like myth now stood still like a statue, admired but no longer alive. You did not kill her. You killed the illusion that held your desire. She began to retreat long before she physically left. You saw it, but you mistook it for softness. A sigh too long, a touch that didn't reach your spine, a sentence offered without urgency. She was not fading. She was resisting the intimacy you demanded, the kind that devours mystery. You confused closeness with love. You thought if you saw every side of her, she would feel more real. But love, real love, was never in her clarity. It lived in the shadows she chose not to light for you. She warned you without words. She dressed her absences in gentle tones. She gave you the gift of half answers, hoping you'd honor the silence more than the solution. But you kept digging. You wanted her raw, open, honest. And when she gave you pieces of that, you saw the woman, not the dream. And that dream, fragile and haunted and intoxicating, collapsed under your hands like wet ash. You begged for her truth. But the truth is never what we desire. It only proves we cannot live on fantasy alone. And yet, we try. You saw her cry one night, and for a moment, you thought this was love. This was what intimacy meant, to hold her when she breaks. But even in her trembling, she was still holding back. Her tears were not an invitation, they were a test. She watched how you reacted, whether you asked the wrong question, whether you flinched when you saw how deep her pain ran. You said all the right words, and still, she grew colder, because it wasn't warmth she needed. It was presence, not the kind that fixes, but the kind that burns with her and says nothing. You kept thinking, if I just make her feel safe, she will love me. But she didn't want safety. She wanted danger that did not destroy her. A man who could stand in the fire of her contradictions without reaching for a fire extinguisher. You tried to tame her pain with logic, with listening, with solutions. But she never wanted to be solved. She wanted to be seen and left intact. You saw her wounds and reached for bandages. But all she wanted was for you to bleed with her in silence. You did not lose her because you were careless. You lost her because you were precise. You measured her love. You traced its origin. You analyzed its temperature. And in doing so, you drained its soul. Some loves are meant to remain unsolved. She was one of them. She wasn't waiting for your diagnosis. She was waiting to see if you could sit beside her without needing to understand why she trembled. But you couldn't. You needed reason. You needed narrative. She needed poetry. You mistook her mystery for an unfinished book, something you could read to the end, mark the conclusion, and call yourself a man who knew her. But her soul was not a book. It was a labyrinth with no center. Every turn she gave you was a mirror, every silence, a doorway. And still, you wanted a map. You wanted to exit with answers, but she had none. She only had presence, and you never learned how to stay without knowing why. She was never trying to escape you. She was escaping the cage of being seen too clearly. There is a violence in being known too deeply, especially when the knower brings intention. You loved her for what she meant to you, but she wanted to be loved for what she could never explain. Not the smiles, not the tears, not the patterns you learned to anticipate. She wanted to be loved in the moments she was most unreadable. But you panicked when she stopped making sense, and she saw it. She saw how you looked at her like a broken mirror when she failed to reflect your expectations. You wanted to say, I know you. And she wanted to scream, then you no longer love me, because to know is to pin down. And what she was offering you, what every woman offers when she dares to stay silent in front of a man, was the sacred space of not knowing. That's where desire breathes. That's where longing lives. You wanted intimacy, but what you meant was ownership. You called it love. She called it suffocation. She still visits you, doesn't she? In the women who answer too quickly, in the ones who tell you everything on the first night, in the softness that feels more like surrender than seduction. You try to recreate her in others, but it never works, because none of them withhold what you now know you need most, the unspoken. You ruined the one woman who dared to keep herself veiled, and now you chase ghosts, hoping for another veil, to lift only to find eyes too eager to please. You say you want someone to open up, but when they do, you lose interest. Because what you really wanted was not the woman, it was the pursuit of her hidden corners, and once those corners are lit, you walk away, calling it disillusionment. But the truth is, it was never about her. It was about your inability to remain in wonder once wonder stops hiding. You want depth, but only when it is silent. You want beauty, but only when it is bruised. And now, you think, was she ever real? Or was she simply the mirror of your own inner division, the part of you that longs to be seen, but fears being defined, the part of you that craves connection, but only if it stays haunted? She did not leave you. You left her when you tried to name her, and the collapse of intimacy wasn't between two lovers, it was within you. Between the man who wanted to understand and the boy who needed to wonder. You look at her old messages now. They were never unclear. You just weren't listening to the spaces between them. You weren't ready to be confused. You thought confusion was failure. But confusion was the invitation. She invited you to stay without answers, and you declined, thinking that real love needed resolution. She needed your presence. You offered explanation, and so she closed the door quietly, not with anger, but with the sadness of a woman who sees yet another man try to dissect the thing that was meant only to be felt. She wanted you to ask questions you didn't know how to ask, not what's wrong, but can I sit with the part of you I'll never understand? Not do you love me, but does my presence leave you untouched in a way that feels sacred? You never asked those questions, and now it is too late. She does not hate you. She has simply become unreachable because you were given access once, and you used it to excavate, not to kneel. You didn't lose her. You lost the version of yourself that could have loved her, the man who didn't need clarity, the man who didn't flinch at her silence. That man could have stayed. That man could have heard her without words. But you weren't him. You were the one who needed to make sense of her sadness. And she knew then, not in anger, but in truth, that she had to leave because you loved her enough to reach, but not enough to stop reaching. And that is how intimacy collapses. Not in betrayal, not in anger, but in the slow erosion of wonder. You saw her clearly and she ceased to exist, not because she was an illusion, but because you made her explain what was meant to be sacred. There was a moment when she said nothing, and it was the most complete thing she ever gave you. A silence so full it bent the walls, stretched time thin, made you feel small in the way only holiness or guilt can. You were speaking, yes, explaining something trivial with the urgency of a drowning man, and she only stared, not cruelly, not with anger, but with a kind of inward mourning, and that silence, that unbearable stillness, said everything. You didn't know how to hear it then. You filled it with reasons, distractions, touches, but you feel it now, don't you? It follows you like smoke. She had no interest in your apologies. She wasn't waiting for you to change. Her silence was not a demand. It was a prayer, not to God, not even to herself, but to the space between you. that invisible third presence you never dared to acknowledge, the part of love that doesn't belong to either lover, yet breathes through both. You thought silence was absence, but her silence was presence too vast for words. You wanted noise. You wanted confession. She wanted you to kneel, not to her, but to the mystery she carried, the one you kept trying to name. You thought desire was in her body, in the curve of her spine, in the softness of her lips when she whispered your name. But that was never where it lived. Desire, real desire, was in the restraint, in how she withheld herself not out of cruelty, but out of sacred defiance. She did not want to be possessed. She wanted to be felt wholly, without interpretation, without a reduction. When she left the room and didn't explain why, that was her truth. When she paused before answering, that was her gift. And when she looked at you without needing to speak, that was the prayer. And you interrupted it. You wanted her to speak your language, but she spoke in wounds. She spoke in breath. She spoke in decisions she never explained. You mistook this for distance, but it was discipline, the discipline of a woman who refuses to cheapen herself with performance. You wanted her to shout, to cry, to tell you what she needed, but she needed you to become still, to hear the truth behind the things she did not say. You could not. You responded with logic. You offered safety when she needed suffering. You gave her warmth when she needed you to burn. There are women who want to be understood. She was not one of them. She wanted to be felt. Not the way a man feels a soft shoulder or the slow rise of breath in sleep, but the way a man feels a wound he cannot reach. She didn't want your attention. She wanted your rupture. She wanted to be the reason you wept in a room alone. Not because she hurt you, but because she made you face the part of yourself you'd buried under years of rational kindness. The part of you that was cruel enough to want her not as a person, but as proof that you could be chosen. You tried to understand her, but she was not a riddle. She was a ritual, and you came to her like a reader comes to a book, hoping for meaning. She needed a witness who came like a monk to fire ready to be burned, without complaint, without question. You were not that man. You smiled too much. You asked too quickly. You touched without tremble, and she waited. How she waited to see if you could sit in the unbearable stillness of her being without reaching to tame it. You couldn't, and she knew. She knew the moment you asked, "What's wrong?" She knew the moment you said, "I just want to understand," because understanding is the sword that kills the divine. She wasn't confused. She was offering you the chance to dwell in mystery, and you said no, without even realizing it. You turned a temple into a bedroom. You turned her prayer into a conversation, and in doing so, you broke something you will never repair. Now, you chase silence in other women. You look for it in the space between their sentences, in the half smile after you kiss them, in the way they hold your hand but don't squeeze. You hope for it, you ache for it, but when it comes, you flinch. Because her silence wasn't just absence, it was judgment. It revealed how loud you truly are, how your whole identity depends on being heard, being seen, being enough. She didn't want to be your answer. She wanted to be your undoing. You tried to tell yourself she was cold, that she had walls, that she never truly loved you. But you know better. Her love was the kind that does not coddle. It tests, it breaks, it transforms by refusal. She never promised to stay. She promised to watch who you became in her absence. And now you are here, whispering her name into the spaces she left behind, wondering if love was ever real. It was. But it wasn't the love you recognized. It wasn't the love that asked for understanding. It was the love that demanded surrender. She didn't want your empathy. She wanted your collapse, not into sadness, but into reverence, into the rawness that comes when you finally stop narrating yourself. She saw the mask you wore, the one made of tenderness and noble intention, and she waited to see if you'd remove it on your own. You didn't. You wore it even when she lay in your arms. You wore it as if she couldn't feel the distance beneath it. But she could, and that's why she stayed silent. That was her final attempt. Her prayer that you would hear what only silence could say. You didn't. And now you understand what she meant. Not through explanation, but through loss. Through the women who speak too much. Through the nights when even noise feels hollow. You don't miss her voice. You miss the way her quiet made you tremble. The way her unspoken grief made you question your worth. The way her absence now sits beside you like a relic from a sacred ruin, too holy to touch, too heavy to ignore. You loved her for what she revealed, but now you realize she was trying to hide, not from you, but from being turned into a conclusion. She knew what would happen once she was known. Once her silences were solved, she would vanish. And she did, not because she stopped caring, but because you stopped trembling. You stopped sitting on the edge of her mystery. You became comfortable, and nothing kills the divine like comfort. So now, when you lie awake and think of her, you remember not her face, not her words, but the moment she said nothing and it shattered you. You remember the pause that felt like a scream, the glance that felt like judgment, the breath that felt like prayer. And you understand now, too late, that what she wanted was not your love. It was your devotion, not to her, but to the space she created. That fragile space where longing meets restraint, where passion meets reverence, where knowing dies so that feeling might live. You never gave her that. You gave her affection, you gave her presence, but you did not give her surrender. You held on to yourself, thinking that was strength. But she did not want a strong man. She wanted a man who could be undone in her quiet, who could weep without asking why, who could look into her silence and say nothing, not out of fear, but out of awe. And so she left, not because you were cruel, but because you were kind in the wrong way, gentle in the wrong places, available when what she needed was distance. She left because you tried to translate her into meaning. And now, all that remains is the echo of a prayer you were never silent enough to hear. She is gone, but her silence is not. It hums in your chest when you wake. It drips into your coffee. It follows you through doorways, and sometimes, when the night is long enough, you catch yourself speaking softly, hoping the silence will answer. It never does, but it listens. It always listens. A single chair in an empty room, the window open, no wind, no movement, just the faint outline of her last breath hovering in the space where you once sat. Speaking too much. A question lives there still, written into the silence like a name carved in water. You do not know what it means, and that is why it remains.